So welcome everybody to this Facebook Live where I'm going to be talking about my experience of ME chronic fatigue syndrome and also getting you to think about your story. So just let me know if you can see me, let me know if you can hear me. I'll just give you a moment to pop messages in the chat because it takes a little while for them to come through, and I'll just check. So hello, and say maybe where you're from in the world. I'll read them out as we go along. So in this Facebook Live, I'm going to be sharing my journey from being bedbound at times to being able to, and not being able to walk for a minute, to being able to play sports again. I remember playing badminton for the first time for 3 hours, which was just an amazing shift. So let's have a look. There's some messages coming through. So let me know, if you can see me, hear me. So hello to Angie, Carol, Francesca. Crystal clear, video brilliant. From Colorado, USA. From Ireland, hello. Hello. Okay, thanks for letting me know that you can see me and hear me. I'm still not seeing an image on my phone, but you can, so that's the main thing. All right, so I'm going to be talking about the highs and lows, the challenges and the opportunities that I experienced in my journey. And my goal is to get you to think a bit about your story regarding causes for two reasons. Firstly, when I talk to people with ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, some people are aware of why they got sick, but some people say to me, I don't know why I got sick. In which case I normally ask them a number of questions, and then it starts to become clear to them and to me why they got sick. I might share some of those questions later if we've got time. So I'm going to share some of the key mistakes to avoid that may hinder you making progress. So get pen and paper. I am going to be getting you to do some exercises. Make sure you've got a drink. Few principles. First of all, I want to make it 100% clear that I believe that ME CFS is a very real physical condition. Let me repeat that. ME CFS is a very real physical condition. Same with fibromyalgia. They're not imagined. Second thing, you're not to blame for having this condition. Everyone's doing the best with the tools they have. I was doing my best, at each stage. And, I was looking at how I could maybe just improve my approach as I went along. So my goal is to explore, why I got sick, and for you to think about the same thing, but without any self-blame or self-judgment. So is that agreed that you're not going to beat yourself up as you think about why maybe you got sick on hearing, my explanation? So if you agree with that, put a chat. California, hi there. Just let me know you agree that there's not going to be any self-beating up. Third point is that I believe that ignorance and judgment from others, particularly health professionals, is completely unacceptable, and personally I don't think it should be tolerated. So I'm saying getting some yeses. Great, thank you. So I have actually written a blog post about that topic of how to deal with people who are being unhelpful. So check out my website for that. Maybe I'll make a list of resources that I'll put in the group. Okay, so if you're not a member of the group, click the button on I think it's the top right of the page, and you can join my group. So let's get cracking. First of all, I want to talk about what life was like before I had ME chronic fatigue syndrome. So in the years running up to going off sick with ME CFS, I got a hi from London. Don't know how to pronounce that. Is it CO Falls? You'll have to correct me next time we speak. All right, so I'm getting a few yeses saying we're not going to beat ourselves up. Good. So I worked for a housing trust supporting men with mental health problems. It was a really interesting job. I liked working with the clients, had a busy social life. I was physically and socially active. I played football, tennis, I swam, I cycled, I partied, I enjoyed life. I was thinking earlier that in the summer I used to cycle to work, which was about 7 miles. After work I'd cycle to Clapham Common, which was a couple of miles. We'd play football for an hour and a half, then go to the pub. Then I'd cycle to my girlfriend's, which was another 7 or 8 miles, including going up a massive hill, which I never got off my bike for. And then I'd have another cycle home up another massive hill, again, which I refused to get off my bike for. So I would probably cover 20 odd miles as well as playing football, go to bed and still cycle into work the next day. And I'm sure for lots of people who developed ME/CFS, their stories are similar. They were active, doing lots of things, enjoying life. Now, there were some lifestyle factors that weren't helpful. I did have the tendency to burn the candle at both ends. And there were times in the morning when I had to get up for work where I'd hit the snooze button 4 or 5 times because I was tired, because I wasn't getting enough sleep. I'd often not get to bed before midnight. I seemed to be resistant to going to bed. I was a bit of a hedonist. I remember going on holiday with some friends down to Cornwall. I mean, it was a great holiday and you know, it was so much fun. We'd be doing all sorts of activities during the day, learning to surf, horse riding, archery. But even at midnight, when my friends were saying, "Oh, let's go to bed," I was like, "No, let's keep going," because I still wanted to have more fun. I wasn't very good at saying no, and that got me into all sorts of trouble because that resulted in me, you know, at times tiring myself out. And I was a worrier. I was quite an anxious person. And I also worried a lot about what other people thought. So these lifestyle factors weren't helpful, and they did probably contribute to me getting sick at times, because I did sort of, as a result of all those things, just, you know, burden myself too much. But generally, I was pretty healthy. It was only when I took on more responsibility at work, I became the director of a housing trust, which was a pretty stressful job, as well as overseeing the care of the residents. I had to manage staff, which was more challenging actually than dealing with the residents. I was responsible for fundraising, being accountable to a management committee and funders. I remember one occasion the house got surrounded by armed police. There was about 60 police outside the house, including 20 odd armed police, because one of the residents who had mental health issues had told an ambulance driver that he had a gun. And this is a chap who wouldn't have known where to buy a loaf of bread. And I had to deal with that. That actually was less stressful than some of the other stuff I had to do in my management role. And over a period of 3 years, my health just deteriorated. I started feeling constantly tired, constantly needing early nights. I would get ear infections a lot. I started to notice feeling really bad after eating sugary things like cake, even drinking alcohol, which was tough because I liked a beer. And for a while I sort of thought, oh no, I really fancy a beer. But after a while I had to just stop drinking because I noticed that it just made me feel awful. And later on, a doctor trained in nutritional medicine explained the reasons for that. I remember going to a wedding and at 10 o'clock at night I had to go to bed because I felt so tired, which previously would have been unheard of. You know, I'd be one of the last ones up. And I remember one summer evening I'd been to the gym a few hours earlier, and I was sitting with my girlfriend and her sister in the garden, and they were in t-shirts, and I felt really cold. I remember going to see my acupuncturist, and she was saying to me, look, your body is in a state of stress. You need to make some sort of change. But I wasn't imaginative enough to actually do something drastic. I probably should have quit my job and gone and laid on a beach for 3 months in Thailand, which I could have done at that stage, but I didn't. And I've talked about this already, but a friend of mine said, I remember being really stressed in my job and going to see the doctor because I felt depressed, and he gave me antidepressants, and I walked out of the surgery and had a light bulb moment. I threw the prescription in the bin and I quit my job, went on holiday. She actually worked on a horse riding holiday in South Africa, had a great time, and she came home and started her own business, dog walking, and she has a great life. And she said, if I hadn't done that, I probably would have ended up like you, completely burned out. Now, it may be that I had some genes that made me more susceptible to certain conditions, but I truly believe that it was the combination of stress and a number of other factors, including some of the factors that I've just mentioned, that was the cause of me going off sick. So I'd like you to just pause for a moment and to consider, what factors do you think may have contributed to you getting sick? So you might just want to write this on pen and paper. I'll maybe just give you a minute to do that. Okay, so I'm going to set my timer, and I'm going to give you a minute just to write down as many things as you can think of, and your minute starts from now. So if you just joined, I'm asking people to just write down whatever factors they think may have contributed to them getting sick. I'm just giving you about a minute to do that. Okay, so minute's up. If you want to, you can just put what you think, one or two or three key factors that you think contributed to you getting sick in the chat. So I'll give you a moment to do that. I know it takes a few seconds to come through. You don't have to if you don't want to, but if you'd like to do that, then go ahead and do that. Now, you may have come across the Life Change Index Scale. And this is a tool you can use that can just help you get a sense of how much stress might have been going on prior to you getting sick. So I will put that in the chat later, and you can do that because it's an interesting exercise. You can also do it, you can rate your score for now to see, how much stress might be affecting you right now. So anyway, in 1997, I went off sick from work, and I kept expecting myself to feel better after a few days. I tried to go back to work for a bit, but after a while I just had to give up, and I said to myself, right, I will go back to work when I've had a week of feeling normal. And I didn't feel normal for 8 years. I was eventually given a diagnosis of ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, and I suffered from fibromyalgia. This is probably very familiar to you, but I missed out on loads of things. My brother's birthday, many other family occasions. I missed my daughter's significant birthday. I missed going to Lion King with her when she was about 12 years old. I'm sure, you've missed lots of things as well. I felt that life was passing me by. There was a lack of progress. I'm sure you know what that's like. Life was pretty miserable. I felt frustrated that no one could help me get my health back. Doctors didn't have solutions. Oh, someone's trying to call me. Let's just get rid of that. So life was pretty grim. I'm just going to have a look and see what comments you've put as being factors. Major stress, taking on too much work, not saying no, glandular fever, riding accident, operations, head injury, swine flu jab, 2009, after running marathon, heavy metals in vaccines, MRI contrast, along with some stress from police, harassment in my area. Okay, major stress, death, father and brother, no sleep, terrible diet, major colon surgery. Gosh, sorry to hear that. Gallbladder out, too much exercise way too soon. HRT, coming off HRT abruptly. So yeah, there's a number of different factors that people are describing. It's not the same for everybody. So a couple more: stress, abusive relationship, not enough sleep, doing too much for everyone else. So there are some common themes coming up. But as I say, I was frustrated that I couldn't get my health back. I saw my doctors regularly, but they didn't really have any solutions. They were at a loss to know what to do. My health deteriorated. I was experiencing more chaos in my life because I wasn't getting things done. And at that point, I hadn't really established routines that might help create some stability. But no one could help. Many people didn't understand the condition and didn't understand that it was a real physical condition. People were saying to me, it's all in your head, or you're doing it all wrong. People do recover by taking Prozac or medication. There were people in the ME CFS community saying that there is no cure. People don't recover. Doctors can't help you. We'll just have to wait for a cure. But I didn't want to wait for a cure. I was going to do everything I reasonably could to get well. Now, I realise at times I did lose my way. And looking back, I realised that I could have done more, been more effective in dealing with a condition. But hindsight is a beautiful thing. I experienced anxiety because I couldn't trust my body, and the slightest thing could cause setbacks. My body seemed very sensitive to food, exercise, excitement and stress. I couldn't even watch TV. I couldn't watch football, which I loved, because it was too stimulating. At times, even eating would leave me feeling exhausted. It felt like my digestion just wasn't working. It almost felt like the food wasn't getting around my system. And I remember actually eating grapefruit at the start of a meal, and that actually did help. And that's because there's enzymes in the grapefruit that help you digest food. As I mentioned at the top of this Facebook Live, there are times I couldn't even walk for 1 minute. I spent a lot of time in bed feeling totally exhausted. I remember having blood tests and having huge bruises on my arm just from having a blood test. And actually I started taking supplements, a good vitamin mineral supplement. And over a period of a few months, those bruises when I had blood tests got smaller and smaller to the point where there was no bruise at all. So, my body was very depleted and deficient. And I think that's just because I was in a heightened state of stress for too long. I felt rubbish all the time. I felt stressed, frustrated, fed up, hopeless at times, helpless and pessimistic. Lots of people offered solutions, most of which cost a lot of money, some of which helped to some degree, but none of which fully, resolved my health. To try and regain my health, I took action. I changed my diet, I did juicing, I started doing meditation, gentle physical activity, yoga. I avoided stress as much as possible. I did have to cut out some people who were just adding stress to my life. And I spent lots of money on lots of treatments. I was worried that they'd be a waste of time, but I thought, well, if they've worked for others, then maybe they'll work for me. At the same time, I was worried that maybe some of these treatments wouldn't work for me. But I did try lots of supplements. I saw nutritionists, tried herbal medicine, acupuncture, naturopathy, Chinese herbs. I even tried colonic irrigation. Ouch. So a question to you is, how familiar is that to you? That you try loads of different things. Some things maybe help to a degree, but you expect the improvements to continue, but they sort of either level off or reduce or fluctuate. So pop your comment in the chat. I'll just have a look and see if there are any more comments. I think my bucket, so in terms of factors that may have contributed, I think my bucket was full, stress, Lyme, CFS mould, and was pushed to overflowing from working in a toxic environment. So death of mother and father within 5 months of each other. Gosh, sorry to hear that. And then losing a baby. It's very tough for you. Carrying on at work, kept getting sore throats. That's something I kept getting. Tried lots of things, spent a fortune, which created more stress. Can relate to all that you're saying. Okay, so, but I kept going. I remember seeing a doctor who had degrees in nutritional medicine and immunology. It's actually quite an interesting story actually about this doctor. I went to a Deepak Chopra conference, and right at the back of the room, there's this room full of 500 people. I remember seeing this chap in a navy suit, looking quite dapper, and I was very curious about who he was. And now if that happened, I'd just go up to the person and introduce myself. But at that time, I didn't. And a few years later, I read this article in one of the ME magazines, and I liked what this doctor was saying. And when I saw the picture, I thought, he looks a bit familiar. I decided to have a chat with him. And as I was speaking to him, his language sort of just reminded me of that Deepak Chopra conference. And I said to him, were you at the Deepak Chopra conference? And he said, yeah, I was. And I said, I saw you, and I was really curious as to who you were. And anyway, he was really helpful. He identified candida, leaky gut syndrome, and adrenal fatigue. And as I looked into these conditions, I remember reading, I think it's Leon Chatto's book on candida. What he was describing made complete sense to me. So I followed protocols, I made dietary changes and took supplements. Certainly the leaky gut syndrome protocol that I took, which was from a company in the UK called BioCare, who are a very good scientific company, and they make very good supplements. That really helped. I noticed a difference. I was able to tolerate exercise as a result of doing that. But I still wasn't well. The doctor was puzzled because others had got better following his advice, but I kept searching for answers. I believed that I would get better, but there were times I did wonder how long it was going to take, and there were periods of despair. I kept hearing people saying that there isn't a cure, people don't recover, and other doom and gloom stories. I was offered Prozac. I was referred to the ME unit at King's College Hospital, which is infamous because the doctor in charge was one Professor Simon Wesley, who has said some fairly unhelpful things and is quite unpopular in the ME CFS community, to put it mildly. I didn't think that Prozac was a solution because as well as knowing the results of the trial of the drug, I had done my own research in one of the ME magazines. I posted an ad in the ME magazine saying, have you tried Prozac? Further people said they found it helpful. 2/3 said they found it unhelpful, or they found the symptoms or the side effects so awful that they had to stop, or it made them feel worse. And I didn't really believe that ME/CFS is due to a lack of Prozac in the body, or that staying on this drug long term, and it's a powerful drug, was the answer. I did hear of people who had to come off of it because of the side effects, and they felt worse afterwards. I felt it was just like masking the real issues rather than addressing the core issues. I did accept the cognitive behavioural therapy because I thought, what have I got to lose? It was helpful to a degree. The people I worked with were very nice and supportive and highly professional, but it didn't give me the results that I wanted, which was full recovery. They did give me information that sort of started to fill in some of the gaps I had in my understanding of the condition, and it's only when I made connections with the information they gave me with other research that I got answers that made sense to me. I talk more about that in my free report, CFS, The Missing Piece. So if you do want some more information about that, I won't go into that now because otherwise it'll just make this session too long, but that is something I, talk about in the report. Now, I discovered an approach that made sense to me, that recognised this condition was real, but was very interested in looking at whether the mind can influence the body. Helped me understand why I got stuck. And I learned some tools that helped me move forward. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. Now, it wasn't plain sailing. I had to work really hard and I tripped up at times. And with the benefit of hindsight, I realised there are things that I could have done to make that journey easier. Again, I'll talk about that in a minute. But finally, things started to change for the better. I started feeling better. I had more energy. People noticed the difference in me. I was able to spend the whole day at my sister's wedding from about 11 in the morning till about 1 o'clock at night. Even singing in front of everyone. Admittedly, everyone was drunk by that point, but prior to learning the techniques that made these changes possible, just the thought of doing that, standing up in front of people playing the guitar and singing, would have left me exhausted. I found that I could tolerate increased levels of activity. As I say, I went from not being able to walk for 1 minute at times to being able to cycle hard, doing an hour of circuits on my bike in the park, playing tennis, and that was cycling at full pelt, playing tennis and badminton for hours. And I started a training course to become a practitioner. So the training program that I did, I'm not actually allowed to mention the name of it according to my contract, but if I say the words LP, you'll know what it is. And I started, as I said, the training to become a practitioner, which was a 2-year training, 1 weekend a month, practicing every week, meeting up with other trainees, and made some great friends. It was a great experience, again, being with people, being in a learning environment, learning stuff that was really helpful. And, a few of the people I met on that course I'm still really good friends with. And when I completed it, myself and one of my friends who I met on the course started working at Phil Parker's clinic. And I did that for 6 years. I was a practitioner for 9 years. It was a brilliant experience. I met lots of people coming to the clinic from all over the world, because at that time there was just a few of us. I was booked up for 3 or 4 months at a time. I remember my first client coming from Norway in a wheelchair. And this client, who was actually a physiotherapist, she'd been using her wheelchair for a year. And incredible though this sounds, on the second day, she walked into the clinic and she wasn't in her wheelchair. The following weekend, she went to her cabin in the mountains for the first time in 2 years. And she went skiing literally for 15 minutes. But for her, that was a massive shift. Now, she lived in Bergen, and there was an epidemic of people diagnosed with ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, because the water got polluted. I think it was in 2004. And she contacted me saying, lots of people are saying to me, what on earth's going on? How come you're just, you went to London and a week later you're walking around? So she said, you've got to come to Norway. So I ended up going to Norway in the space of a year, 9 times. I could have gone more often. And it was an amazing experience. I was contacted by doctors in Norway and a pioneering psychiatrist who was very interested in mind-body medicine. And I took this client with me to meet him. who'd been in the wheelchair. And as I say, she was a physiotherapist, so she was able to talk to him from that perspective about the training. And a few years later, when I met him again, he said to me, that meeting I had with you was life-changing. He and some of his colleagues actually trained to become practitioners as well. And people would contact me saying, look, can I meet you? Can I take you out for dinner? I met up with these doctors and I got to know a physiotherapist, and one of the doctors in particular and the physiotherapist became friends, and they actually sent me loads of clients. They observed the training and saw the results firsthand. And actually the doctors got in touch with me in the first place because they saw the change that their patients had made. So some of these people came to London. I trained 45 people in Norway. I had loads of amazing experiences. I was invited to someone's house. Their back garden overlooked a fjord, so we sat and had dinner overlooking this beautiful scene. I remember having dinner on a mountaintop watching the sunset. A client took me on a private boat cruise around Oslo, which was amazing. I got taken to a fantastic restaurant in Bergen where they brought us whale meat sashimi. Norway and Japan are the only countries which are allowed to serve whale meat. Didn't really like it. Very strong taste of cod liver oil. But fortunately they bought a white wine and lime juice granita as a palate cleanser, which was the most delicious thing ever. Anyway, I had a great time. I wish I had the pictures to show you, but they all got lost when my computer died. But I was invited to train people in other places, Spain. I went to Jersey. I was invited to Lebanon, but the client came here in the end. I travelled in the UK, which I really enjoyed. I really like going to different places and, discovering new towns and cities. I remember a model contacting me, and I had a real dilemma because I had to choose between training her or going to Glastonbury Festival. And because I love going to festivals, Glastonbury won out, but I did pass her on to a colleague of mine. And I had a great time at the festival. And that was, for me, going to festivals again was an amazing experience, because for many years my brother would be going off to these festivals and I'd watch some of it on telly and hear all the stories and stuff. And to go to Glastonbury for the first time was just one of the most memorable experiences ever. It was just awe-inspiring. I started travelling again. I went to visit a friend in the Middle East, went to Europe, different places. So you're probably wondering, what did I learn that made these changes possible? So I will answer that in a moment, but before I do, I'm just going to see if there are any other messages to respond to. Okay, some people are saying the screen is freezing. Okay, it's working now. Good. All right. No, I didn't do DNRS actually. I haven't done that training. The training I did is called the LP. I'm sure, hopefully, you know what that training is. And what I really learned from the research I did was that, and from the training, was that a combination of factors, stress being a key one, can make people sick. I also learned that ongoing stress can keep us sick, and I definitely recognise now that when I had ME/CFS, I was generating a lot of stress. And being in fight or flight stops the body from healing. It stops the body from producing and storing energy. It stops the body from achieving deep, refreshing sleep where important repair functions are carried out, so that we can wake up refreshed and ready to go. It stops the digestive system working properly, so we're not digesting our food properly and we're not getting the nutrients to the cells that need it. And our immune system is suppressed. As I mentioned earlier, I talk about this more in depth in my free report, CFS, The Missing Piece. So if you want to read that report, it only takes about 15 minutes to read. Go to my website, mecfsexplored.com, and you can sign up for that report. In the training, I learned how to identify unhelpful responses. Now, there are going to be times when you know you're off balance, but in my experience, I didn't know how to restore equilibrium. This is what I learned. Okay, looks like the broadcast was interrupted, but hopefully you can hear me and see me now. Again, maybe just put yes in the chat if you can hear me, if you can see me. Let's just have a look. There's a quick comment coming through. Was it gradual for you or quick recovery? For me, what I would say is it was a bit of a game changer, and it really opened my mind to what was possible. But I did have to work hard over the coming weeks and months. And even when I started working a year later, I realised, because delivering the training was pretty physically demanding. You're, talking for 4 or 5 hours, 3 days consecutive. Initially, I'd find I get quite dehydrated. And I've spoken to other trainers who'd say, wow, I would never do training 3 consecutive days because it is demanding. So I really had to build up my stamina, but that did come with time. So I realised I had to keep working on those tools. So it was a gradual process, just to answer your question. As I've mentioned, I gave you one example, but for some clients, it has been rapid. I remember training Okay, I've got cut off again. I will try. This is my last attempt. If I do get cut off, I will make a recording, piece everything together, and post it. So the question was the LP? LP was definitely a massive part. I think there were some tweaks I made to make it work for me, and I incorporated those things in the training, and I'll talk a little bit more about what I think really would have helped me move forward. But anyway, I'm going to keep going. I'll get to the end before I respond to any more comments, just in case I get cut off again. So what I was saying is there's sort of 3 core steps. One is identifying the unhelpful responses, interrupting them, and then actually I developed a critical thinking method, which is a unique approach to help you break patterns that have been slipping under the radar and help you develop your critical thinking skills. I added that because I felt that was sort of missing from other approaches that I tried. Just stopping a response without really fully understanding what the roots are to that response, how we're generating that response, I think is missing a step. And the third step is really practicing creating those new responses until they become the default. So I went from being a worrier to someone who spent much more time being calm and relaxed, having a sense of trust. And, I really, really had to work hard at using those tools. When I first started learning those tools, I quite honestly did say to myself, oh my goodness, I am pretty neurotic. I have got lots of work to do. But I did work hard, and it did take concerted effort. I think if I think about some of the mistakes I made over the whole of that period, certainly one was not establishing helpful routines. Initially, my approach to the condition was pretty chaotic. Over time, I did start creating a rhythm. So I'd get up, have breakfast, then I would have a rest. And, after a while I started meditating. Initially, I would literally just sleep. I would have breakfast, sleep for 2 or 3 hours. I'd have lunch, sleep. I would have dinner, and then I'd be in bed at 9 o'clock. And that was my routine for a while because I was just totally exhausted. As I started making some small improvements, I was able to do some activity at times. It varied greatly. I remember in 2005 going on holiday with a friend, and at times just a 15-minute conversation would leave me feeling totally exhausted. And that was just before I did the training. So even that was after 8 years of ME/CFS. I still hadn't made consistent progress. Now, learning to meditate was great, but what I didn't realise at the time is that all the other stuff I was doing when I wasn't meditating, when I was having breakfast, having meals, doing activities, I was still getting myself into a state of stress, and that at the time I wasn't addressing. So I was saying to myself, why is it I'm meditating, I'm relaxing, but I still don't feel significantly better? It's because I was still generating lots of stress. One of the mistakes I notice sometimes that comes up when I talk to people, I remember seeing a post on Twitter where someone said, I tried going swimming and it made me feel worse, so I can't go swimming. And it was as if they were saying, I'm never going to be able to go swimming again. Now, I went swimming and it did really drain me. I think that it was just the cold water was just too much for my body. So I do think, therefore, if you're doing something like Wim Hof, it's something you have to go really, approach it really gently and slowly. If you don't know what Wim Hof is, again, I'll put a note in and I'll post it in the group. So do join my group, ME/CFS Explored. But I did just say to myself, okay, I can't swim for now, but this isn't going to be forever. So that's really adopting a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset. The third mistake I made, definitely when I learned the tools, was not getting extra help when I needed it. And actually I did meet someone who I thought, actually, this would be a really good person to work with because we're on the same wavelength. I really liked her gentleness, and my intuition was telling me she would have been a good person. But I didn't have, again, at that time, I didn't have the imagination to think, actually, you know what? I think working with her would be really beneficial to me. On reflection, I did need more coaching. Would have made things easier. And I now run group coaching for people who've done brain training, who just feel they need a bit more help. And I wish that was available to me, after I'd done the training. So challenges. As I got better, I realised I needed to address some of the patterns that contributed to me getting sick. So as I mentioned earlier, I had a tendency to burn the candles at both ends. So I had to learn better self-management, especially as I was transitioning, moving from being unwell to wellness. So I remember when I was training to be a practitioner, I started the training literally 3 months after doing the training program, the LP. And, I was still in transition. And I remember driving to my friend's house. We were practicing each week. I'd drive over to her house in Chigwell, which was about an hour's drive away. Got there 7:30, and about 9:30 I'd be thinking, I'm starting to feel a bit tired. Maybe I should just use the tools to get more energy. Whereas actually what I needed to do is, knowing that it's going to take me about an hour or so to get home, I should have gone home and just said, actually I've done enough. 2 hours of practice is plenty. The second thing I mentioned earlier is that I was a bit of a hedonist. And that is a pattern that, I still am a bit of a hedonist, I have to say, but I had to learn how to curb that. But there were times when I still pushed myself too hard, and it's part of being human. Sometimes we do that. But I knew what to do if I did overdo it. I remember the third thing I mentioned was I wasn't very good at learning to say no. And I've had to learn how to do that. And I remember about 8 years ago, it was approaching Christmas. I normally take the week off before Christmas off, and a woman got in touch with me. She was pregnant, and she said, look, this is my last chance to do the training, I'd really like to. She lived in Scotland at the time. She said, I'd like to fly down to London and do the training with you. And I said yes, but, actually I was pretty tired. And by the end of training her, I felt pretty drained. And I ended up being in bed with flu and missed Christmas. I felt really terrible. And I was stressing a bit, thinking, I've got to get back to work. And I'm feeling really flu even after, I think, a week. And it was at the time of swine flu, but I was too unwell to go to see the doctor. And then I suddenly remembered that I know all this stuff. And so I started just getting myself into a calm state. I really focused on getting myself into a really relaxed state, not allowing myself to worry about anything for that half an hour. And I did that twice a day, and literally after a couple of days, I started to feel significantly better. So in terms of not being good at learning to say no, I had to learn how to say sorry, I'm tripping over words. I had to learn to say no. I had to learn to speak up, and I became less tolerant of bad behaviour. I also mentioned that I was a worrier. I learned how to become more relaxed, to care less about what people think. I must admit, when I started making videos, that felt really uncomfortable because I was putting myself, in the firing line. But now I think, what? Some people are gonna. I remember someone said to me, even if you do a great job, around 10% of people are going to hate what you do. You just have to learn to live with that. And I've learned to be less sensitive to what other people think. Now, 4 years ago, I had a bit of a mishap, a physical injury. And I had 5 operations. It's classed as minor surgery, but a mistake was made in one of the surgeries, which means at the moment I can't exercise as vigorously as I used to. And it has been causing me some issues recently. I can't cycle, I can't play tennis vigorously. However, I'm really glad of the tools that I have, because I'm very grateful for the life I have. I still bounce out of bed raring to go. I love life. I love the work I do. I'm constantly inspired by clients who work hard and apply what they're learning, that they keep at it. It's not always easy. I'm really grateful for the simple things I'm able to do. Walking in the park, sitting in a pub, going into town. I love sitting on the number 12 bus, and when the bus goes over Westminster Bridge and I see the Houses of Parliament, I always think of a scene in one of the Sherlock Holmes films where Sherlock Holmes jumps out of the Houses of Parliament into the river, and it just makes me happy, even partly because there was a time when I couldn't even watch telly. So there are so many films I'm still catching up on. People often look at me with disbelief when I say, I haven't seen such and such a film. Still catching up. I love being able to go out, partying, clubbing, dancing. It was a friend's birthday recently, and it was a fancy dress party. The theme was the film Metropolis, and I went dressed as a robot. It was great fun. Had a great time. As I said, I love going to festivals. Loved being able to go on holidays, weekends away. So that's where I am. And so I am really grateful for all the people who've taught me along the way, the psychologists at King's who did help to some degree, to Phil Parker who, really helped with the LP, and some of the other things that really helped me along the way. I've learned a lot from Tony Robbins, Louise Hay, to name just a few. So I'm going to pause a moment because I've been chatting for quite long. Just going to see if there's any other questions, any other comments. I'm going to take a quick drink. So let's have a look. Yep, so a lot of people saying it's been freezing, missing the juicy bits video. I don't know why that was happening. In your view, is there a common factor in people who do not make a recovery? That's an interesting question. It's a tricky question to answer because it would be quite easy to answer that in a way that people might feel as if they are to blame or at fault. All I can say is based on my experience of working with people when they haven't quite got the results they want, is that when I work with them, I can normally help people identify the factors that are contributing to getting in the way. Now, it would be arrogant to assume that that might apply to anyone and everyone, but that's certainly been my experience in the main. But I have to adopt a position of humility, knowing that I don't know everything. Then there might be other factors beyond my comprehension. I'm not a doctor, and obviously I always say to people, check with the doctor whether there's anything else that may be a factor. Many people with ME/CFS know as well as I do that the doctors are often limited in how they can help. So, for instance, when I had Candida, a doctor said to my mum, if he had Candida, he would be hospitalised. And I thought that was such an utterly ludicrous statement, because it showed that there was a complete lack of understanding that Candida operates on a spectrum. You might not have it at all. You might have it to a small degree. You might have it to a degree which is really, debilitating. And why would you wait until you were so bad that you had to be hospitalised before you started taking it seriously? I do believe that the Candida was debilitating, and that explained some of the symptoms I had. When I mentioned to this doctor who's trained in nutritional medicine that, when I ate sugary food and when I drank alcohol, that I felt terrible. It was like my whole body felt sort of spongy. He said, well, that makes complete sense, because if you've got an overgrowth of Candida, as soon as you have those things, that feeds the yeasts, and that is going to create lots of symptoms. One of the symptoms was a feeling of acidity. And one of the things I did to counter that was, and I think this was recommended in Leon Chatot's book, was juicing. So I juiced every day. I made vegetable juices. And my understanding is that helps counteract the acidity. And I think that did make a difference. As I say, it didn't cure me completely, but I think without doing those things, I would have felt worse. So I think getting the right help at the right time, I was lucky that I could afford to see different practitioners. This medical doctor was helpful. I saw someone else, a herbalist called Kitty Campion, who's quite famous, if you know about, herbalists in herbalist circles. And she actually, her diagnosis was overlapping with this doctor's. So I hope that gives you some food for thought. Let's see, any other comments? Carol's question for me too. Yeah, so hopefully that's addressed it to a point. Seems stuff. Yeah. Will you recap the 3 steps? Yeah. So 3 steps. So first step is we need to identify the unhelpful responses that we're generating. Some of them are unconscious. We don't even realise we're doing. And so, for instance, I was working with someone last week who was saying, I've done an online program, but what I'm realizing is by having face-to-face coaching, or on Skype coaching as we were, then you actually help me identify some of the unhelpful patterns that I don't even realize I'm doing. So, first step, identify. Second step, interrupt the unhelpful responses. And third step, creating new responses. And with practice, those responses can become the default. Okay, so Candida is a yeast overgrowth, okay, in the gut, and it can cause all sorts of problems. I have written a blog post on it, so if you go to my website, mecfsexplored.com, and go to my blog, do a search for Candida, it'll come up. I know that because it came up today. All right, so if you've got any more questions, post them in the chat. I'm just going to tell you about, if you do want more information, I say go to my website, MECFS Explored. Every week I offer 3 free strategy sessions. There's no obligation to become a client, and I won't do any hard selling. If you want to check that out in the group, you can post the question, has anyone had one of the free strategy sessions? Hopefully people will tell you that I don't do any hard selling. And there's no obligation to become a client, but in the session we will identify where you are right now, what you think's working, what's not working, what your goals are and what you think is possible. We'll focus on the sticking points, what you think is getting in the way. And usually I help people identify some of the sticking points. And then the fourth step is that we actually create a simple 3-step action plan, so that by the end of the session you'll have a sense of clarity and confidence in your ability to take some positive steps to move forward. I had a session with someone yesterday and they posted a nice comment in the group saying they found it really helpful. They also sent me a nice email. I'll actually ask them if they would mind sharing it in the group, so I won't share what they shared with me, but they said it was actually a massive shift. And if you want to know more about the training in that session, you have to ask, okay? These sessions are first come, first served. As I say, I do 3 free sessions every week. Let's have a look, see if there's any other comments. What's my view on POTS, high heart rate? POTS is interesting. Again, I have written, I'm wondering if I've written a blog post. It's certainly, if you're on my email list, you'll get an email about POTS. There can be a number of reasons why POTS occurs, but what we know about POTS, I remember listening to a very interesting podcast where, I can't remember if she was a doctor, but anyway, this woman was talking about the fact that heart rate variability, if we've got good heart rate variability, that means that our heart responds to any change. So if I go from sitting to standing and I have good heart rate variability, then my heart is able to respond quickly and I feel fine. Heart rate variability is associated with fitness. So obviously if you have ME, CFS, then we are less fit. And that can affect the heart, which means that we experience the symptoms of POTS. As I say, there might be other factors that can contribute to POTS. So that is just one perspective. Maybe we can finish with a 2-minute relaxation exercise. And I'm sure some of you will know this exercise, but I will explain it for those who don't. And actually, if you want, you can do any exercise, any relaxation technique. So what I want you to do, and obviously only do this if it's safe to do so. So if you're currently driving, tightrope walking, or operating heavy machinery, don't close your eyes and do this exercise. Stating the obvious, but anyway. So what you're going to do is you're going to focus on one of your hands, either your left hand or your right hand. And first of all, you're going to focus on your little finger. And you're going to close your eyes, and as you breathe in, you're going to say a word to yourself. Not yet, we'll do this, we'll start this in a minute, but you'll say a word to yourself. Could be peace, love, calm, trust, or any other word. As you breathe in, you're going to say that word to yourself silently in your head. And as you breathe out, you'll say a different word. Could be peace, calm, love, trust. Then you go to the next finger and do the same thing. You say that word as you breathe in, you say that different word as you breathe out. Then you go to your next finger, your next finger, your next finger, and then your thumb. I hope I counted the right number of fingers. And then you go back to your little finger and repeat. If you lose your place, you just let go of any thinking, go back, choose a finger, carry on. If you catch yourself thinking about something, just let go of that thought as if it's floating off in a cloud, go back to the exercise. So I hope that makes sense. So let's do that just for 2 minutes. I'm going to set the timer. So let's do that little exercise starting from now. Okay, so maybe I'll just ask you, and you can pop your comment in the chat. What score would you give for calm before you did that exercise, with 10 being very calm? And what score would you give now after just doing that exercise for 2 minutes? So maybe just pop your answer in the chat, and I'll wait a moment for those replies to come through. But thanks to you all for participating. Sorry for the tech issues, but that's the way it goes. You know, I must admit there would be a time if that happened, I would be super stressed about that. But actually, can't do anything about it, so there's no point worrying about it. So some 5 to 7. Okay, and I see a couple of people have asked for a strategy session, so I'll send you a personal message. If you don't get that, feel free to PM me and I'll send you the link. What are the symptoms of POTS? Well, one of the symptoms is that when you get up, you feel dizzy because your heart isn't responding quickly enough. Okay, thanks for sharing. You're welcome. You're welcome. 5 and then 8. How cool is that? So my little challenge to you is, if you're not doing something like that already, could you do that simple exercise for 5 minutes once, twice or 3 times a day? And in my group ME CFS Explored, you can actually access a free audio where I explain that exercise and you practice it. So check out the group if you'd like to access that. 6 to 8, 4 to 6. Excellent. All right. So thanks everyone. Thanks for joining in, and hope to see you on another Facebook Live soon. As I say, feel free to send me a message. And if you do like this video, do feel free to share it with anyone who might find it helpful. Bye for now.